Airport staff bully Barron Trump, but regretted everything when his mom Melania Trump arrived. It was a chilly afternoon as Barron Trump stepped into the bustling terminal of JFK International Airport. Wearing a simple navy hoodie and jeans, he pulled a baseball cap low over his forehead, hoping to avoid any unnecessary attention. It had become second nature for him to blend into the crowd, just another tall teenager traveling alone. He adjusted his backpack and made his way toward the security checkpoint, blending seamlessly with the sea of travelers. The airport was its usual chaotic self, with hurried passengers, long lines, and the distant hum of announcements echoing across the terminal. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until a gruff voice stopped him in his tracks. "Hey, step over here." Barron turned to see a uniformed officer pointing directly at him. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a stern face and eyes that seemed to scan every detail with suspicion. His badge read Officer Daniels. Barron hesitated, confused. "Is there a problem?" Daniels folded his arms, his eyes narrowing. "We'll see. What's your name, kid?" "Barron," he replied, keeping his voice calm. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Barron, huh? And what's your last name?" Barron took a deep breath. "Trump." The officer's eyes flickered with recognition, but instead of softening, his expression hardened. "Trump, huh? And where are you headed, Barron?" "Back to D.C., Barron said, sensing the officer's growing hostility. Daniels smirked. "Sure you are. Got some ID on you?" Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out his passport, handing it to Daniels without a word. The officer flipped through it slowly, taking his time as if searching for something incriminating. "Looks legit," Daniels said, snapping the passport shut. "But I've seen kids like you before, spoiled rich boys who think they can do whatever they want." Barron's jaw tightened. He'd heard comments like that before, but it still stung. "I'm just trying to catch my flight," he said calmly. Daniels crossed his arms again, leaning in slightly. "We'll see about that. Empty your pockets. Let's have a look at what you're carrying." By now, a few passengers had started to glance in their direction, curious about the unfolding scene. Barron could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their judgment. He knew how this looked, a teenager getting singled out by airport security. He emptied his pockets, placing his phone and wallet on the table. Daniels picked up the phone, turning it over in his hand. "Nice phone. Bet it's the newest model, huh? Must be nice to have everything handed to you." Barron clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "I bought it myself," he said. Daniels chuckled. "Sure you did." A female TSA agent nearby looked uncomfortable. Officer Daniels," she said quietly, "maybe we should move this along. He's got all the proper documentation." Daniels waved her off. "I'll handle this," he said sharply. He turned back to Barron, his voice dripping with condescension. "Listen, kid. I don't care who you are. Around here, everyone plays by the same rules. Got it?" Barron stared back at him, refusing to be intimidated. "I understand the rules. Can I go now?" Daniels didn't answer right away. He seemed to be enjoying the power he held over the situation, savoring the control. Finally, he shook his head. "Not yet. We're not done here." He motioned for another officer to come over. "We're going to need to search his bag," Daniels said. Barron sighed, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop them. He unzipped his backpack and placed it on the table. Daniels rifled through it, pulling out books, headphones, and a laptop. "Traveling light, huh?" Daniels said, holding up the laptop. "Let's see what's on here." "No," Barron said firmly, stepping forward. "That's personal." Daniels raised an eyebrow, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Got something to hide?" Barron opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and immediately picked it up. Without a word, he tapped on the contact labeled Mom and pressed the call button. Daniels watched him, his smug grin fading slightly. "Who are you calling?" Barron held the phone to his ear, his voice steady. "My mom." Daniels chuckled nervously. "Oh yeah? And what's she gonna do?" "Just wait," Barron said calmly. The line connected almost immediately. "Barron," came the familiar voice of Melania Trump on the other end. "Hi, Mom," Barron said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm at the airport." There's a situation. Stay right where you are, Barron. Melania's voice was calm but commanding. I'll be there soon. The call ended, leaving an eerie silence hanging in the air. Officer Daniels tapped his fingers on the table, attempting to mask his growing unease. Calling in backup, huh? Daniels said with a smug grin. I've seen this before. You think your mom's going to intimidate us? Rules are rules, kid. Barron didn't respond. He knew better than to argue. His eyes remained steady, his posture calm, traits he had learned from his mother, who had always taught him to remain composed under pressure. The female TSA agent from earlier shifted uncomfortably beside Daniels. Maybe we should wrap this up, she suggested softly. We've already checked his documents. Everything seems in order. Daniels shot her a glare. I said I've got it under control. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a distance, curious about the commotion. Whispers spread among the passengers as they tried to piece together what was happening. Barron glanced toward the entrance, knowing it wouldn't take long for his mother to arrive. When Melania Trump said she'd be there soon, she meant it. 15 minutes later, the airport's main entrance burst into a flurry of activity. Heads turned as a group of security personnel moved swiftly through the terminal, clearing a path. Walking calmly in the center of the commotion was Melania Trump, her presence commanding and elegant as always. Dressed in a beige trench coat and dark sunglasses, she radiated a quiet authority that silenced the crowd. Every step was deliberate, her gaze focused solely on the security checkpoint where her son stood. Officer Daniels noticed the sudden shift in the terminal's atmosphere and turned toward the commotion. His smug expression faltered as he recognized the former First Lady approaching, her eyes locked on him. Ma'am, can I help you? Daniels stammered, his earlier bravado replaced by a nervous politeness. Melania removed her sunglasses, her icy blue eyes boring into him. Yes, she said, her voice cool and controlled. I believe you've been harassing my son. Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His face turned pale, and he instinctively took a step back. The female TSA agent quickly stepped forward. Mrs. Trump, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. It's a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Melania interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. You've singled out and humiliated my son for no reason. I want to know why. Daniels attempted to regain his composure. It's standard procedure, ma'am. We treat everyone equally. Do you? Melania raised an eyebrow. Because from what I've heard, this doesn't sound like equal treatment. It sounds like targeting. Barron watched quietly, grateful for his mother's presence but still uneasy about the situation. He knew how much power she carried, but he also knew she wouldn't let this go without getting answers. Melania turned to Barron, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Are you okay? I'm fine, Barron said, his voice steady. She nodded before turning back to Daniels. You've made a serious mistake. I want to speak to your supervisor. Now, Daniels hesitated, glancing nervously at his colleagues. Ma'am, I really don't think that's necessary. It is, Melania said firmly. Unless you want the situation to escalate even further. Daniels swallowed hard and gestured toward a nearby office. Right this way. Inside the office, the airport's head of security, Mr. Reynolds, listened intently as Melania recounted the events. Barron sat beside her, calm but clearly frustrated by the experience. Daniel stood awkwardly near the door, his earlier confidence completely gone. When Melania finished, Reynolds leaned forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Trump, I sincerely apologize for what happened. This is not how we operate. I can assure you we'll conduct a full investigation. I expect nothing less, Melania said. But an apology isn't enough. There needs to be accountability. My son was targeted and humiliated in front of dozens of people. That's unacceptable. Reynolds nodded. You're absolutely right. Officer Daniels will be placed on immediate suspension pending the investigation. We'll review the security footage and speak to the staff involved. Danielle's face turned bright red. Sir, I was just doing my job. You went too far, Reynolds said sternly. Your job is to ensure security, not to harass travelers based on personal bias. Daniels opened his mouth to argue but quickly thought better of it. He lowered his gaze, knowing there was no way out. Melania stood, her posture as regal as ever. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I'll be following up on this personally." Reynolds nodded. "Understood. Again, my deepest apologies, Mrs. Trump." As they left the office, the terminal was still buzzing with whispers and speculation. Barron glanced around, his eyes meeting those of several onlookers. Some looked curious, others sympathetic. Melania paused just before they reached the exit, turning to Barron. "Are you okay?" "I am now," he said, managing a small smile. "Thanks to you." She smiled back, placing a hand on his cheek. "You're strong, Barron. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise." The story didn't end there. Within hours, the incident had made headlines. News outlets ran clips of Melania's arrival at the airport, praising her poise and composure in handling the situation. Social media lit up with discussions about the importance of standing up against unfair treatment. Officer Daniels's name became synonymous with poor judgment, and the airport issued a public statement apologizing for the incident. But for Barron, the experience was more than just a media story. It was a reminder of the strength he had inherited from his mother. He had faced a difficult situation and come out stronger, knowing that he could rely on the people who truly mattered. The fallout from the incident spread quickly. Within hours, news stations picked up the story, broadcasting footage of Melania Trump's arrival at the airport. Headlines ranged from former First Lady defends son at airport to Barron Trump targeted by overzealous security officer. Social media exploded with discussions. Some praised Melania for standing up for her son, admiring her grace under pressure. Others called for accountability, demanding that Officer Daniels face the full consequences of his actions. By the next morning, the airport's official statement had gone viral. JFK Airport Statement. "We sincerely apologize to Mr. Barron Trump and his family for the unacceptable treatment he received from one of our security officers. This behavior does not reflect our values or commitment to treating every passenger with respect and fairness. An investigation is underway, and appropriate action will be taken." For most people, the story would have ended there. But for Barron, it lingered. The experience had left a deeper impression than he initially realized. A few days later, Barron sat on the balcony of their home in D.C., staring out at the horizon. The late afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light, but his thoughts were far from peaceful. Melania stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to Barron and sat beside him, studying his face. "You've been quiet these last few days," she said softly. "Do you want to talk about it?" Barron shrugged, taking a sip of his tea. I don't get why he did it. I didn't do anything wrong. He didn't even know who I was at first, but it felt like he hated me anyway." Melania nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes people judge others based on what they see on the surface. It's unfair, but it happens. You've learned that firsthand now." "I guess," Barron said. "But it still feels wrong. What if you hadn't been there? What if no one believed me?" Melania reached out, placing a hand on his. "That's why you must always stay strong and never let anyone define who you are. People will misunderstand you. They'll make assumptions. But what matters is how you respond." Barron met her gaze, her words settling into his heart. "You didn't even hesitate," he said. "You just showed up and took care of everything. How did you stay so calm?" Melania smiled. "It wasn't about being calm, it was about protecting you. When it comes to my family, there's nothing I won't do. And you're stronger than you think, Barron. You handled that situation with grace and dignity, even when it wasn't easy." Barron leaned back in his chair, the tension in his chest easing just a little. "I'm lucky to have you," he said quietly. Melania squeezed his hand. "We're lucky to have each other." Meanwhile, back at JFK Airport, the investigation into Officer Daniels's behavior was moving quickly. Internal reviews confirmed what everyone had already seen. Daniels had overstepped his bounds, singling out Barron for no valid reason and treating him with unwarranted hostility. By the end of the week, Daniels was placed on indefinite suspension pending further disciplinary action. His colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. For Daniels, The realization of how badly he had misjudged the situation hit hard. He had thought he was in control, but now he saw how his own bias had blinded him. His once confident swagger was replaced by regret, though it was far too late to undo the damage. Weeks later, life had mostly returned to normal for Barron and his family. The media had moved on to other stories, and the incident at the airport faded from the headlines. But the experience stayed with Barron, shaping him in ways he hadn't expected. He became more aware of the assumptions people made about him, both because of his family name and because of how he carried himself. Instead of letting it weigh him down, though, he used it as motivation. He learned to be more empathetic toward others, understanding that everyone faced their own struggles and judgments. One evening, Barron stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of his jacket. He was preparing to attend a youth leadership event, where he'd been invited to speak about his experiences and the lessons he'd learned. Melania appeared in the doorway, her eyes shining with pride. "Are you ready?" Barron smiled, a quiet confidence in his eyes. "I think I am." The event was held at a large conference center, filled with young leaders from all walks of life. Barron stepped onto the stage, the bright lights illuminating the expectant faces in the audience. He took a deep breath, remembering everything he had been through. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I'm here tonight to talk about something we all face at some point in our lives: judgment. People will always have opinions about who you are, based on where you come from, how you look, or what they think they know about you. Sometimes those opinions will be wrong. And when that happens, you have two choices: let it break you, or use it to make you stronger." The room fell silent as Barron shared his story, detailing the incident at the airport and the lessons it had taught him about resilience, empathy, and the importance of standing up for yourself. "When I was in that situation, I felt powerless," he said. "But I wasn't alone. My mom showed me that it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to demand fairness. And now, I want to encourage all of you. If you ever find yourselves in a situation where someone tries to define you or put you down, remember that you're stronger than they realize. Stand your ground, and never be afraid to speak up." The audience erupted in applause, and Barron felt a wave of pride wash over him. As they left the event that evening, Melania wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders. "You did well," she said. "Thanks," Barron replied. "It felt good to talk about it." "You've grown so much," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm proud of the young man you're becoming." Barron smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "It's because of you, Mom. I wouldn't be here without you." Melania hugged him tightly. "We'll always be in this together." And as they walked toward the car, the city lights twinkling around them, Barron knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. Weeks turned into months, and the airport incident gradually became a distant memory for most. But for Barron, the experience had left a lasting mark. It wasn't just about the momentary embarrassment or media attention. It was a pivotal experience that shaped his perspective on life. He found himself paying closer attention to how people around him were treated. Every time he saw someone being judged unfairly or dismissed because of how they looked, it hit a little too close to home. Rather than ignore it, Barron made a conscious effort to step in and offer support when he could. At school, he became the kind of person others felt comfortable approaching, someone who listened without judgment and stood up for what was right. His quiet confidence, once mistaken for aloofness, became one of his most admired qualities. Even his teachers noticed the change. One afternoon, his history teacher, Mr. Dawson, stopped him after class. "Barron, can I have a word?" Mr. Dawson asked, adjusting his glasses. "Sure," Barron said, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. Mr. Dawson leaned against his desk, folding his arms. "I've been really impressed with how you've handled yourself lately. I know the last year hasn't been easy for you, but you've shown a lot of maturity and leadership. Have you ever thought about running for student council?" Barron blinked in surprise. "Student council? I don't know. I've never really thought about it." "You should," Mr. Dawson said with a smile. "You have a voice people listen to. And after everything you've been through, I think you could make a real difference." Barron considered it for a moment, feeling a spark of excitement. "I'll think about it," he said. Good, Mr. Dawson replied. Let me know if you decide to run. I'll be rooting for you. That evening, Barron brought it up during dinner. Melania sat across from him, listening attentively as he explained Mr. Dawson's suggestion. I don't know, Barron said, pushing his food around his plate. Do you think I could actually do it? Melania smiled. I think you can do anything you set your mind to. You've already proven that. Besides, you've always had a strong sense of fairness and justice. That's exactly what a good leader needs. Barron nodded slowly, the idea starting to feel less intimidating. Maybe I will run. It could be a good challenge. I think it's a great idea, Melania said. And no matter what happens, I'll be proud of you for trying. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Barron threw himself into the campaign, learning everything he could about student council and brainstorming ways to improve the school. His platform focused on inclusivity, mental health resources, and creating a more supportive environment for all students. His peers responded enthusiastically. The shy, reserved boy many had overlooked was now a confident and thoughtful leader, unafraid to speak his mind. On election day, the cafeteria buzzed with excitement as students cast their votes. Barron stood near the ballot box, greeting classmates and thanking them for their support. By the end of the day, the results were in. Barron had won by a landslide. As his name was announced over the loudspeaker, a wave of applause filled the cafeteria. Barron felt a rush of pride and gratitude. This victory wasn't just about the title, it was a testament to how far he had come. The following week, Barron attended his first student council meeting. Seated at the head of the table, he listened as his fellow members shared their ideas and concerns. When it was his turn to speak, he took a deep breath. First of all, I want to thank all of you for trusting me to be your president, he began. My goal is simple. I want this school to be a place where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. We're all in this together, and I believe we can create something really special if we work as a team. The room erupted in applause, and Barron couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. Back at home, Melania followed his progress closely. She attended his speeches, offered advice when he needed it, and always reminded him to stay true to himself. Watching him grow into a confident young leader filled her with pride. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Melania handed Barron a small, wrapped box. What's this? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Open it, Melania said with a mysterious smile. Barron tore off the wrapping paper, revealing a leather-bound journal. He opened it to the first page, where a note was written in his mother's elegant handwriting. This journal is for you to record your thoughts, your experiences, and everything you learn along the way. Leadership is a journey, and I want you to remember every step. Trust your instincts, stay kind, and never forget how strong you are. Barron blinked, his throat tightening with emotion. Thank you, he said softly. This means a lot. Melania placed a hand on his shoulder. You've already done so much, Barron. I can't wait to see what you do next. Months later, Barron stood on stage at a school assembly, addressing the entire student body. It was the final assembly of the year, and he had been invited to give the closing remarks. As he looked out at the sea of faces, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey that had started with an unexpected confrontation at an airport had led him to this moment. A moment of growth, strength, and purpose. Thank you all for an incredible year, Barron said, his voice ringing clear and strong. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that challenges can be our greatest teachers. We all have moments when we feel judged or misunderstood. But those moments don't define us. How we respond does. I hope you all remember that you're stronger than you realize, and that kindness and courage will take you further than anything else. The auditorium erupted in applause, and Barron felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. As he stepped off the stage, Melania was waiting for him, her eyes filled with pride. You've come a long way, she said, pulling him into a hug. I couldn't have done it without you, Barron replied. They stood there for a moment, soaking in the moment, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger than ever.